Was Moses a capitalist or a socialist? Or is it possible to fit him into either of those boxes? Today we'll see that the Mosaic Law does affirm private property and some forms of a capitalist system. If anything, a free market is the core of the system, but it has many provisions at the same time for taking care of the poor and making sure that all of the wealth doesn't fall into one person's hands. We'll start by looking at Leviticus 19. So in blue, I've outlined things that are related to private property and capitalism, these statements in the law, and then in the yellow is provisions for the poor. So you can see here, when a farmer was harvesting their crop, they were not supposed to harvest the whole thing. They would leave some of it out. They would not do it right up to the edge, this says, and instead they would leave the edge and the gleanings for the poor. Same thing for the vineyard, the fallen grapes, leave them for the poor and the sojourner. So the idea is that they would not take the full crop, but they would leave some of it for people who didn't have their own land and couldn't provide for themselves. You know, back then people couldn't just go to Walmart and buy food. Most of the population was involved in subsistence agriculture at some level. So they had their own land and they would work the land, get the crops from it, and eat those crops. Or if they had an excess, they could sell it to someone else. You know, not everyone was a farmer. There were other trades, but the bulk of the economy revolved around farming. Now it's important to note here that it doesn't say, you know, take your crop and just eat what you need and give away all the rest to others who have a lack, right? From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. The Mosaic Law here is definitely not affirming communism in that strict sense. Now back to the passage. In the next section here, you'll see all these statements that affirm private property. You know, just the simple command that you shall not steal, which is part of the 10 Commandments. You shall not covet and you shall not steal. Both of those are affirming that there are things owned by other people that, you know, we do not have a right to, and we need to let other people have their things and not just not take those things, but not covet it or have envy for it or desire it in our hearts, you know, imagining that we could take it from them. It goes on to say here, you shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of a hired worker shall not remain with you all night until the morning. So this first part, you shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him, you know, this is once again just an affirmation of the rule of law and justice, and that, you know, we need to treat others the same and not try to take their property or their labor without paying them for it. It says, the wages of a hired worker shall not remain with you all night until the morning. So in other words, you can hire a worker to work your field, your vineyard, but make sure you pay them. And don't put off paying them, you know, indefinitely into the future. And again, here, you shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great. You need to have the same law for everybody, and it applies across the board. You don't show favoritism to the rich. You don't show favoritism to the poor. So having these provisions in there that provide for the needs of the poor doesn't really mean they're showing favoritism. They're just sort of giving them the bare minimum of, you know, here's the edges of my field, here's the grapes that were dropped while we harvested the vineyard. We're not going to try and clean out all 100% of that. We're going to leave some of it for others to come in and gather. Let's look at another passage, Deuteronomy 15. So this is talking about the sabbatical year. And this was every 7 years, there would be a huge change in the economy where every creditor would release what he has lent to his neighbor, and he would not sort of keep a record of that debt. He would let it go and forget about it, totally forgive that debt. Now it does go on to say that, you know, of a foreigner you can take that debt, but if it's your brother Israelite, you're to let it go. And there's a lot more stuff on here about taking care of the poor, basically other Israelites who somehow, should become poor, as the passage says. So in that case, you shall open your hand to him and lend him sufficient for his need, whatever it may be. You shall give to him freely, and your heart shall not be grudging when you give to him, because for this the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in all that you undertake. So on the surface, these statements seem to say that if somebody comes to us with a need, another Israelite, we need to just give them, whatever they ask. Just keep taking care of them, keep feeding them, clothing them, whatever, over and over again, even if they never develop the responsibility to take care of themselves. To me, this sounds like enabling somebody who's pretty irresponsible. But I don't think that's actually what the passage is saying. If we read on a little further, we'll see some important criteria that were involved in this taking care of this poor Israelite neighbor. Starting here, if your brother, a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman, is sold to you, he shall serve you 6 years. And in the 7th year you shall let him go free from you. And when you let him go free from you, you shall not let him go empty-handed. You shall furnish him liberally out of your flock, out of your threshing floor, and out of your winepress. And then, it gives the reasoning for this is that as the Lord your God has blessed you, you shall give to him. God has taken care of you. God has abundantly provided for your needs. So pass that on to the people you come in contact with. But then look at this last statement here at the bottom of the page. It shall not seem hard to you when you let him go free from you. For at half the cost of a hired worker, he has served you 6 years. So what in the world is going on here? Now, imagine this situation again. Let's say you're the landowner who's fairly prosperous. You're really successful in your farming business. You have an excess crop that's more than enough to take care of your family, and so that you can sell part of it away and therefore maybe, buy more land or buy better tools, and that makes you more productive. Now, you have a neighbor who comes to you who has not been as successful, for whatever reason. Maybe they're not working as hard, or maybe they just had bad luck. Some success is just due to chance and luck. Maybe they were born to a less prosperous family, and whereas your parents were pretty well off and they sort of taught you how to manage the farm, and that's a big part of your success. Whatever the reason, we have here this wealthy landowner, and we have a poor brother Israelite who's coming for employment. And this passage says, okay, a lot of crazy things. So one is that he's only working with you for, at most 7 years, and then you're going to let him go free. Not only are you going to let him go free, but you're going to liberally give him of your own capital, your own possessions, so that he can sort of make a start on his own as he now goes off on his own. You shall furnish him liberally out of your flock, out of your threshing floor, and out of your winepress. So furnishing out of the flock would give this former worker the means to sort of start his own farming operation. Giving him, out of the threshing floor and out of the winepress would give him food and drink, maybe to take care of him for the first few months or a year. We really don't know. It doesn't exactly prescribe how much to give him, but it says liberally. So the picture I see here is you're letting him go and you're giving him enough to get started on his own. That's the point of this. But contrast that with what happened during those 7 years. The passage literally says that he has worked for you for half the cost of a hired laborer. So to me, this really does sound like a very, capitalist free market situation. You have this one person who has not been very successful. Maybe they don't have a lot of skills, and therefore they're just sort of being taken in as a charity case. I mean, that's literally what this passage is saying. You're taking this person in as a charity case, and they're working for you. And according to this last verse, you aren't even paying them the normal wage for a laborer, presumably because in a truly free market, this is not the person you would hire. This is someone whose skills and maybe work ethic is lower than the average Israelite. That's why he's in this situation. And so when you take him on, you're not necessarily having to pay him the market rate, or in a sense, you are paying him the market rate because his skills are a lot lower than people who are sort of gainfully employed as laborers, and various landowners want to hire them because they're so effective in what they do. So if we really step back from the system and look at it again, it seems pretty brilliant, right? You have this person who's able to come in and they're working under on this farm for 6 or 7 years. They're earning sort of a apprentice sort of wage as a laborer, and they're learning from the other workers on the farm and from the farmer himself how to do this more effectively. And when they complete this term of service, remember they weren't paid a lot because their skills didn't warrant it during their service, but at the end they're released with sort of a bonus for their time working. So hopefully they're released with this bonus of possessions that actually helps them to get their own start, as well as all the skills that they've learned during their 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe even 7 years on this farm. If you enjoyed this video, just click here to watch part 2, where we'll continue in the book of Deuteronomy and look at different provisions for taking care of the land and for making sure that the land was equitably distributed over time.